In this lesson, we will discuss how to get started with Dataform, and at the end of this module, you will get some hands-on practice via the lab. Let's start with the code lifecycle in Dataform, and then we will jump into how to get started with Dataform. After extracting raw data from source systems and loading into BigQuery, Dataform helps you transform it into a well-defined, tested, and documented suite of data tables by writing code. Dataform compiles the SQL workflow code in your workspace to SQL in real time, creating a compilation result of the workspace that you can execute in BigQuery. Dataform uses settings you defined in the dataform.json file to create the compilation result. Dataform integrates with multiple Git providers and enables data analysts and data engineers to collaborate on the same repository. To tailor Dataform code lifecycle to your needs, you can configure the compilation result to influence where and how Dataform executes your SQL workflow. Then, you can manually trigger or schedule executions to influence when Dataform executes your whole SQL workflow or its selected elements. Now let's take a look at how to get set up so that you can start using Dataform. The first step is to set up a repository. A repository contains a single Dataform project that can be connected to your Git provider. Each Dataform repository houses a collection of SQLX and JavaScript files that make up your SQL workflow, as well as Dataform configuration files and packages. You interact with the contents of your repository in a development workspace. A development workspace is your own editable copy of a repository. In a workspace, you create, edit, or delete the contents of the repository without affecting others who work on the same repository, and then commit and push your changes to the repository. In a development workspace, you can develop SQL workflow actions by using Dataform Core with SQLX and JavaScript, or exclusively with JavaScript. Dataform preserves the state of files in your development workspace between sessions. You can link a Dataform repository to a remote Git repository hosted by Git providers like GitHub, GitLab, and Bitbucket Cloud. After you link the repositories, the changes you make in a Dataform development workspace can be pushed to and pulled from the remote Git repository. Each repository will have a dataform.json file that configures basic settings required to compile your Dataform project, like the project ID, table prefix, and schema suffix defaults, which you can override. When creating a repository, the region you set for the repository doesn't impact where the data in BigQuery is stored. You need to grant certain permissions or roles using IAM in order for your code to access BigQuery datasets, which you will get to do in the lab at the end of this module. Once you do all that initial setup, you will spend most of your time developing and executing your pipelines, starting with declarations. You can declare any BigQuery table type as a data source in Dataform. When creating declarations, you can add descriptions and tags, which will be visible in BigQuery. You can declare dependencies to define a dependency relationship between objects of a SQL workflow. In a dependency relationship, the execution of the dependent object depends on the execution of the dependency object. The next part is the fun, familiar part, which is writing your transformations. Tap into all the SQL discussions we have had so far to build your transformations. And finally, assertions. An assertion is a data quality test query that finds rows that violate one or more rules specified in the query. If the query returns any rows the assertion fails, Dataform runs assertions every time it updates your SQL workflow, and it alerts you if any assertions fail. And once you are ready to execute your workflows, you can use the Executions tab in the workspace to monitor your workflow executions. The figure in the slide shows a failed execution. Take note that although the service account, project ID, and detailed error message are blanked out in this screenshot, they are displayed in the product. In this example, the execution failed because the service account didn't have the appropriate privileges assigned.